And I make the point, Chris, though, that these kids are going to come back, and some of them are close to adulthood, into a tinderbox that is some of these mosques and some of these Islamic centres in Western Sydney and Melbourne, and they will basically be radical jihadi rock stars. I mean, they are the bloodline of some of the worst terrorists we have seen in recent history.
And so the easy thing is, the safest way for the Australian people to stay safe is to keep these people out of the country. And that's hard, right? But the world's a hard place, and no one should know that better than these women, because they lived in some of the hardest places in the world. And I had the same sympathy for them that they had for the Yazidis. You know, essentially, that served as slaves in their households.
Well, over the weekend, and I'll play my report in a moment, but I sat down with a young group of Assyrian Christians, and they were in a village of 11 villages were raided. This time 11 years ago, the 23rd of February, and I spoke to a young man who at the age of 10 was held hostage by Islamic State for a year. The fact that this young man has tried to rebuild his life and is in Australia and at university, I find incredibly inspirational.
Yeah, but like I say, you should go and ask the Yazidis, some of whom live in Australia, about the way that they were treated by these people and by these women, because they served as sex slaves in their households.
Let's talk about One Nation, because they are barnstorming the polls across the country. It's not just, you know, people angry in Victoria with a terrible Labor government that will go to the polls in November. We're seeing similar numbers coming out of South Australia. We had numbers come out today with Roy Morgan out of New South Wales, solidly ahead of Labor, almost double the number we're seeing on primary vote for the coalition. Not much of a foothold in Queensland, and that's, you know, the birthplace of One Nation, which says to me that the immediate action that David Crisafulli took on issues like crime, youth crime in particular, has cut away some of that natural easy ground for One Nation, but where Liberal oppositions fail to take the fight up to the incumbent government, One Nation is where the votes are going.
Yeah, and of course the Crisafulli government can do things in government that you can't do in opposition, so you can actually have a demonstration effect, and that they're doing a good job obviously in Queensland. But let's face it, the coalition faces an existential crisis at the moment. It'll be tested in South Australia. It may well be annihilated in South Australia. Then of course comes the by-election in the seat of Farrer. So Angus Taylor has started well, but his tests lie ahead of him now. I think the stuff that he's done recently, he's actually had a really, really good start.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, because, you know, it feels like he's been there a lot longer than a week and a bit.
Yeah, and also I think they've made some good early choices. They've laid down some markers, and today was another mark on where they intend to head. So we're getting a clear sense of direction. I also think he's doing much better in press conferences than I thought he would be doing at this stage. So he's keeping it simple. He's keeping his messages simple. When he's getting asked questions about constitutional law and what will happen if it goes to the High Court, who cares? It's never going to the High Court. What the coalition announced today was essentially a debating point that it's going to be having with the government. And it knows it's on a winning argument with this one. It knows that the majority of the population silent or being loudly in support of them.
I think they're smart too to use the tactic of legislation next week to introduce some of their own ground into the parliamentary chamber, because as you can see with the way questions are divvied up now and the predominance of the crossbench, it's very hard for the opposition to get the sort of oxygen opposition's got even 10 years ago. So having this device of the legislative debate about Islamic State, I think that makes it hard for Burke, but I also think it makes it hard for the Prime Minister.
What we've seen also with Tim Wilson and what we saw today is that they're going to make the government respond to them. They're going to try and start laying down some of the markers for where the conversation's going to be had. And I certainly think that that's a change for the better.
I'm going to get to tariffs with my panel a bit later on, but just before we do, we move off. The United States, obviously, more activity in relation to Iran. There's a lot of reports out that people have started to take to the streets again in Iran, and obviously we've seen battle groups and other sort of military assets move into the region. Where's this headed, Chris?
Well, you don't move that kind of assets, those sorts of assets into place without intending to use them. And I'm pretty sure that Donald Trump intends to use them. I'm sure that the Israeli government's pushing them to use them. Now the question is how and how big a strike might come. Are they just going to intimidate them to try and get some sort of backing down on their nuclear program, you assume that Benjamin Netanyahu is saying to Donald Trump, you cannot trust anything that they say, so Israel will not accept anything by the way of bargaining this away. They may well be thinking that if they strike hard enough and high enough, that the people might take to the streets. But look, really, this is going to be an extraordinarily difficult thing to land, and the possibility of more unintended consequences in the Middle East, well, that's usually what happens. So, you know, we are now again in a very dangerous time there.
We'll watch it carefully. Thank you, Chris.